Welcome back to In Light of the Gospel. Today I'm talking to my brother-in-law Carlos Peters about parenting, about being a father. But before I get into that, I want to share some things with you. There's a YouTuber named Patrick Bet-David. He's got a YouTube channel called Valuetainment. A lot of really good, valuable stuff on there about business and finance. Not all of it I agree with, but like everybody, right? There's a lot of good stuff on there. He shared some things, some stats today about fatherlessness. And I just want to read a few of them here for you, so that you get the grasp or the idea of what we're talking about here, the scope of what we're talking about. Now, most of you listening to this will not be able to identify with this as much because you probably don't come from a fatherless home. If you were raised Mennonite, then probably much more than likely you were raised with a dad, and maybe you are a dad that is involved. But how much more this should motivate us and empower us to want to move forward being good dads, not just available dads, not just kind of there, but actually fully participating in our children's lives. So here's a few stats. About 80% of single parent homes are led by single moms. Most single parent homes are moms. At a rate of 23% of children living with one parent and no other adults, the United States stands over 3 times the world average of 7% children raised by one parent. So I know Canada's not exactly US, but I think our stats are very similar to theirs. Often I'd have to check to see what Canada's are. But he said that across the globe, China, India are at like 3 or 4%, I believe. But across the globe, only 7% of children are raised in fatherless homes. But in the United States, it's at 23%. That's a huge, huge number. And then he says this, that even for children with a father present in the home, this would apply to us, the average school-age boy only spends about 30 minutes per week in one-on-one conversations with his father. 30 minutes per week. For comparison, the same boy, on average, will spend about 44 hours per week watching television, playing video games, and surfing the internet. 30 minutes a week spending one-on-one time with dad compared to 44 hours with a screen. 90% of all homeless and runaway children are fatherless homes. 63% of teen suicides, fatherless homes. 85% of children and teens with behavioral disorders come from fatherless homes. And on and on and on it goes. I would encourage you to go watch Patrick Bet-David's video on that topic. But Carlos and I get into that, and we talk about being intentional, about on purpose raising your boys especially, but your girls as well. So I hope you get some value from this. I hope you appreciate it, and that you realize that being a father is the greatest calling that you have apart from loving their mom, and that it's one of the highest callings that we have as Christians is to be good fathers. So take it to heart. Subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends, but most of all, go spend time with your children and teach them how to be men. Yeah, so where do you start a conversation like this? Carlos and I are both pretty young dads. I mean, I'm a few years down the road from you. I've got a 19-year-old daughter now, a 17-year-old daughter, and a 15-year-old son. So when we talk about child training and raising boys or teaching boys to be men, we're not really talking from the perspective that we know how to do it all. But I've appreciated the way you've raised your young boys. They're very young still, but you've been very intentional. That's the word that you kind of probably want to use today quite a bit. Uh-huh. And I, from very young on, when I was a very new dad, I'm sure I did plenty of things wrong and probably still do. But one of the things that God did in my heart was completely turn my heart. There's one of the last verses in the Old Testament, Malachi. He says that when John the Baptist comes, he's going to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to the fathers. And that's, for me, that was like the 180 turnaround. Like, whoa, this is my life. I need to raise this child, right?
So I think one challenge nowadays is how do you get to that point, right? There's obviously a relationship that needs to build in order for you even as a father to face our hearts towards our children and our children towards ours in unity, right? And nowadays with technology and whatever kids are busy doing now, I find that it's difficult often to even connect on their level, right? Often the things that interest my kids don't interest me, or I don't get excited about, right? But I think often we need to overlook what we want to do, right? And then we get into what excites them or what passion they have, and then once you get down on their level and you understand the things that catches them, that's when you can speak to them, right? Because then you're in their comfort zone instead of, hey, I need to talk to you. Then they're potentially intimidated and so on.
That's right, and it starts with the idea of confrontation.
Yeah.
One of the things, the major advantages that you and I have, and that's another thing that we should probably say, I know quite a few men who got saved in their late 30s or in their 40s, and their kids are already in their teens, and so I can't really truly identify with that. I worked very hard from very young on to train my kids, to have them obey, and to be joyful together, right? So it's been a lifelong thing where my kids don't ever really disobey me. The little ones, obviously, they learn and they grow, but they don't go against us, right?
Yeah.
So it's a different perspective than someone who's trying to win back.
Well, once you have older boys, then the word disobey, it's they are going out of their way to disobey you. It's not like a spur of the moment, like, I'm just not going to listen. It's they know better. We've taught them. Yeah. But they're being intentional, right? You use that word both ways, right? They're being intentional about going the other way, or just not paying attention to what you're saying, right?
So you and I, with our little kids like Trevor, Jackson, Austin, and Tyson, they might be times when they go and do something that they knew they shouldn't have done, but it was just like in the heat of passion, they got excited and they're like, "Oh shoot, I wasn't supposed to go there. Now I already did it." But they're thinking like a 15-year-old, 16-year-old who's maybe at youth group or something, and the boys are doing something they shouldn't. He's just like, forget what mom and dad's saying and do anyway. That's a different. That's like rebellion, right?
Yeah, total different stage in life for sure. Yeah. Right. There's a certain point in time where we would, pass on the torch, or pass on the idea of you are now your own being. You are now your own man, or daughter or whatever, right? Yeah. But they're responsible for their own actions instead of looking to us all the time.
That's right. Right. And you're hoping to slowly get them to that point where you kind of wean them off of you in a sense. One child training book that I read years ago, Michael Pearl, he said that his goal was to have his kids graduate from him to the Lord Jesus, where they no longer needed him as almost like you're being the Holy Spirit in their life when they don't have the Holy Spirit yet. You're guiding them, you're teaching them, influencing them, instructing them, keeping them from doing the wrong things, and then eventually you can take your hands off. But it's a 20-year process.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the steps it take to sharpen their conscience, if you will, right? For them to realize, obviously, right from wrong, but them to see it before it comes, right? Like I know a lot of kids, they or teenagers and whatnot, right? They don't realize they're being caught in sin, or they don't think about it, right? Because it's just something that teenagers do, or young boys and girls do, or whatever, right? But if they're aware of the dangers, then they're like, oh, this is something that Dad talked about, right? This is something I should stay away from because they're aware of the dangers, right? To prevent, right? Yeah,
yeah. You're kind of training their soul to be the captain of their body, right? Yep. So that that's what the Holy Spirit does for me now. The Bible says that we should grieve not the Holy Spirit of God, whereby we are sealed unto the day of redemption. So now I have something inside of me that kind of controls my outward doings, and so that's what we kind of are trying to do to our kids. We're insulating them from the inside, teaching them how to govern their bodies
without being too. I don't want to use the word controlling,
right?
But you have to be controlling with young children, right? To guide them along the way. Yet, I don't know. Some people might not agree with manipulating your kids into making decisions that you want them to make. Okay. Right? You guide a conversation to the outcome that you want to see. Right?
So that it almost seems like they came to that conclusion.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right? And I do it with the boys, and I think it's a healthy relationship because obviously what I want for them is in their best interest.
Right. You're not trying to get something out of them.
No. But it's when it's their idea, when they come to the realization that they did something wrong or they acknowledge something out of their own will instead of, hey, dude, you screwed up, or you did this when you should not have. Yeah. Right? Because then they'll start approaching you because there's a relationship there.
Yeah. One of the things I was considering earlier is I've called this podcast In Light of the Gospel. So doing marriage in light of the gospel, raising children in light of the gospel, living your life outside at work and all that kind of stuff, right? So how do you, in light of what the gospel tells us, in that you are saved completely by grace through faith, no obedience necessary for you to get saved, right? You're completely Christ's work and not your own. So now what I was thinking about is there are some people who are very super focused on the idea of grace, which I am as well. Then they take that into parenting and they think that the way to parent properly is to emulate the gospel. And on one hand, I would say yes, but if you think parenting is just showing your kids grace, showing them grace, you're going to develop a very lopsided child.
Well, there's no learning.
Right.
Like I think if the kids, or even us as men, if we screw up, which we do, but if we don't learn from our mistakes instead of just for being forgiven, right?
But the gospel does teach us as Christians to live righteous, right? The fact that God shows us grace is the motivator for us to do right. But what I was thinking of is the gospel would not have been precious to the world, not just to me personally, if God had not first brought in the law that made us all feel like, man, I don't measure up. Here's God's standard. This is what he wants me to live like, and I haven't done it. And then the grace comes in to forgive us. And so I feel like we should be like Jesus was full of grace and truth. So when we're parenting, we should be bringing in the law, showing the kids what they can and cannot do, and enforcing it. And then when they feel like they've really failed, absolutely every single time they should recognize grace and love and mercy. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I guess I more or less want the kids to see that on their own, right, with guidance. But the only way, when I was growing up, the only way that I would learn something is like I could be told something 100 times, right? But when it comes from somebody else, right, or like then it's just it's not the same. I'm being told what I did was wrong. When I come to the realization of myself,
was not smart.
No, then I was like, whoa, that was serious.
Yeah.
Right. And then you'll learn from it. You know.
And it sinks in.
Yeah. Because forgiveness happens, right? But you don't forget the sin, right? So you prevent from doing it again, right?
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned just before we started recording was years ago. I remember saying this to somebody. He had his first son, and I was really happy for him, excited. And I don't know if he asked me for some tips or if I, being myself, just kind of threw in some tips. I forget what it was now. But I said, most parents train their children by accident. The kids just grow up in their house. I said, one thing that we tried to do was raise your kids on purpose, meaning intention.
Absolutely.
So that's something that you really seem to be
the word intentional. It's you're inconveniencing yourself for their best interest, right? And you could take that from from a relationship advice with your spouse, or with your kids, right? Like I mentioned earlier, doing things that interest them. My boys, they love crafting. If they can craft and build something and do something, like this morning, for example, they wanted to build a parachute out of a Lego man, right? And we were thinking of cutting paper and bending it and shaping it and this and that.
My boys just did that last week.
Right? And maybe that's where they got the idea, right? But Austin all of a sudden comes out and goes, why don't we just use a coffee filter? And I'm like, yeah, that'll work. Why not, right? But, it's one of those ideas where would I have come up with the idea of, hey, let's build a parachute? No, let's just go do something manly. In my opinion, crafting may not be very manly, but it's creative. It challenges them in so many different ways and different aspects, right?
Stretches their mind.
Yeah.
And I think keeping boys busy in general with their hands and with their mind is going to be super important, right? Because the boys that we see being raised around us today, young 20-somethings even, they don't have any capacity to do things with their hands, or unless it's just this, right? They can fiddle with their fingers really quick. But as far as doing something productive and valuable, it's kind of lacking in our culture.
Well, that's because I don't mean to insult other fathers that let their kids just grow up unintentionally or whatever, but all of a sudden, a lot of dads, they always say, careful, your kids are just going to grow up like that. Or all of a sudden, now you have a 3-year-old, and then all of a sudden you have a 20-year-old, which looking back, I have a 9-year-old, right? That went by really quick. Yeah. But when you're living in the moment, you seize each opportunity instead of just letting the days go by, right? Often when I'm on my way home from work, I'm like, okay, my brain is tired. I don't physically do work, but mentally, often I'm exhausted.
Yep.
And I'm like, okay, but I have to have energy for my wife and kids, right? Otherwise, why should they be, penalized for my being mentally tired, right? So
Huge
often,
point.
usually I'm a 98 kilometer an hour guy, cruise control. When I come home from work, sometimes I'm doing 80. Just slow down, recuperate. And that way, as soon as I walk in the door, I absolutely love when my kids just embrace me when I come home, right? And it's just, it's a feeling like none other, right? The dog is one thing.
You prepare your mind on the way home to say, okay, here goes.
Yep.
I was listening to a secular podcast the other day, a guy named Jocko Willink and Andrew Huberman, both very famous in the secular podcast world. Andrew Huberman's a scientist. Jocko Willink is a former Marine, so a soldier, big, tough, strong guy. And they were talking about that very thing. He said, the scientist guy said that the energy that you need to accomplish a task is not found in food or in calories. Because we often think about energy as calories. So I remember learning in high school, 1 peanut is 6 calories. So if you need to climb a flight of stairs, all you need is 6 calories. So if you eat a peanut, you could have the energy to climb a flight of stairs. So my mind was always thinking, okay, if I put food in my belly, then I'll have the energy to do stuff. But he said that's actually not the case.
It's not all physical.
He said it's all, like, that energy to get up and do something is all in your mind. Like, say for instance, you broke your leg, you can hardly walk. And then somebody yells that there's a fire in the house. You'll be off that couch and you will be running through the house if need be. Whatever it takes. So not that you should be constantly running on adrenaline, but the energy to do something is more in your brain than the food that you've eaten. So you might be exhausted at the end of the day, but the thing is that men don't really they can't afford to be exhausted when they get home.
No. Not if you want to speak to your children and speak into their lives, right?
And your wife. And the whole,
absolutely.
Because the dad kind of sets the tone for the whole household.
If I come home with energy, everybody has energy. The dog feels that I have energy.
That could be the case for all of them. Like, the wife can be the same way. But ultimately, I think it rests on you, right?
But yeah, you definitely set a precedence as soon as you walk in the door.
The dog feel it?
The dog can feel it. If I have energy coming in the door, my dog knows. Like, one thing my kids... and I don't get excited about it, but I do it because they absolutely love it. But if I walk in the door and if I chase each and every one of them, and if I tackle them down and just give them a hug or embrace them or tickle them, right? And Austin's getting to the age of, he's 9 now. It often ends in I tackled a kid, right? And he might get hurt.
Okay.
So it's not
a little rougher,
right? I gotta, I take my socks off, otherwise I'm gonna slip and fall. But it's just something that they absolutely, like, I have to take the dog, throw the dog at, so otherwise the dog will just chase us and bite my heel, right? But it's something that they absolutely adore. But your energy level when you go home is absolutely huge, right? And it reminds me of when Jesus was talking to the Samaritan woman, right, at the well, right? The disciples went into town to go get food, and they come back with food. And Jesus is like, I'm no longer hungry, or I don't think he said
I have food to eat that you know not
of, right? And it's a spiritual nourishment, right? So I think when we speak to our children with a level of positive energy, right? Whether it be, 5 love languages, words of affirmation, or you compliment them, or a physical touch, or whatever is needed at different moments in life, right? You can speak to your children without even knowing the words that you don't need words all the time, right? And that's where being intentional is so important, because you could just go home and sure have fun with them, right? But then you go do your own thing and the kids do their own thing, right? You spend 15 minutes. I mean, sometimes I get home from work and then I have a meeting, or I have something to do, right? Or Bible study or something, right? And then the kids kind of get ignored. It happens.
And then the problem with that is anybody who's an involved person in their community or in their church or at their work or whatever, they end up spending 10 to 12 hours a day at their work, probably. If you work 10 hours a day, you're on the road, you're getting ready, you're going to work, and then they come home and they probably spend an hour or two watching a show or sitting there just relaxing. How much time is actually really spent with their kids? I think our culture now makes a big push to spend quality time together. So you'll see dads or moms taking their kids on dates or going on little camping trips. Those are good things. I'm really for them.
But unless you plan, like, we have 4 kids, and unless you plan and schedule that, like, okay, I'm staying home with the other 3 while Linda takes this one and pours her heart and soul into this child and spends time and invests into them, that's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
Right? So if you're not intentional and if you're not, if you don't make plans like that, it's just not going to.
And I don't think those quality time moments replace quantity time.
No, because I don't know. I know a lot of people, and we do it as well, right? We'll watch a movie or watch a show or something, right? But we're not watching, right? I'm often on my phone, browsing or doing something, right? And I'm like, I'm not even here. When the family all laughs at something funny,
You almost have to rewind it.
I'm like, wait. What was funny, right? I missed it because I was being ignorant on my, and that's my fault, right? And yeah, it's you're distracted. I'd stare at 2 computer screens all day, majority of the day, and then I go home just to stare at a bigger screen, just being distracted on my smaller screen, right? It just doesn't make any sense. Right?
Do you set limitations then for yourself, or have you not really taken that kind of initiative to say I'm going to stop with the screens?
We've made it a point that if we're watching something, if we're doing something as a family, then our phones try to stay on the kitchen counter.
Sometimes with watching a show or a movie, it almost feels like, well, you're not together anyway. But there is something still together, right? Yeah. You're together watching something taking place, and you're laughing together. You look at each other, or you talk about it later. Yeah. It is definitely still maybe not the best family activity, but it does still bring the family together to some degree.
Yeah, to have a weekly movie night or something like that, right? As long as it's fine. But to do something together with the kids, right? In the winter time, it's more difficult and it's more challenging to think of things to do as well, right?
Yeah, I know that kind of talks a lot about keeping boys busy. One of the other things that I really wanted to mention on that topic was that self-confidence, self-motivation, or the belonging that a lot of kids are lacking, I think comes from the fact that they don't feel relevant. They don't feel like they're useful. So one thing that we've tried to do from when we were living in Vienna at the small house in Vienna, just in town, or whether now we're here on the farm, we're trying to make each child somehow do something, whether it's once or twice a week or whether it's every day, where they feel like I am actually a vital part of the function of this family. And so that we don't tell them, you're a good boy, you're a good boy, you're a good girl, great job, when you didn't do anything. But rather we give them some skill or some responsibility, some chore that falls upon them to do, that they might get reprimanded for not doing. But after a while, they just do it without even thinking, right? And then it makes them have that value.
But it also gives you the opportunity to praise them and to compliment them, right? Like I think of the whole words of affirmation, and one thing that the Raising a Modern Day Knight course caught on to a lot was praise your children in public. Right?
That's interesting. I've heard that too.
If you do it in public, and don't do it, say, Austin, make sure you're listening right now because I'm about to praise you. Right?
Yeah.
Just like the other morning, I was doing the opening at church. And the boys are super, I can't remember why they got up super early, but they made us all breakfast and they brought us coffee and they were all excited. So I said something along those lines Sunday morning in front of all these people, and I was praising my boys. But I didn't do it so they would feel good about themselves. I just did it because that's
genuine praise.
Yeah. I was excited about what they did. And afterwards, Linda just says, she goes, you should have seen the smile on that boy's face. When I acknowledged and all these people knew that they did something good, right? He was excited. And he would, hopefully do it again, right? But just when you speak to them unintentionally, not even when they're listening, right? Like, we're socializing in your living room and the kids are in the kitchen. And if we praise our boys, they're listening. I can't help but think in the back of their mind they're listening.
They're noticing.
Or they're doing something.
And more than that, they catch the way you actually genuinely feel about them. Because kids can become a nuisance. They can become difficult to deal with. And then you won't feel like praising them. But if your kids are actually doing what is required of you, like lately I've been on the road a lot more than I've been home. And Trevor, 11 years old, he feeds all the chickens, goes and gets the eggs. He'll throw the hay on the side-by-side, drive it back there and give it to the cows and all that stuff. Ezra does it all, and I just expect it because he's big and he's strong. He can do it. But Trevor it's built a confidence in him where he's like, I can do all of that.
And it's a sense of responsibility too, right?
And so one of the things that I've read in Jordan Peterson's book, secular guy, obviously not a Christian, but one of the chapters in his first book that he wrote for public, he said, is called this: never let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. And I thought that was huge, because then you will like them and it will be easier to praise them. When a lot of times there's this terrible cycle where you've let them do things that you don't like, and then you're constantly reprimanding them for things that they're doing. but you were the one that let them get away with it for time and time. Like the Bible says, fathers, provoke not your children to wrath. Some parents, some dads will provoke their kids and tease them to the point where they get angry, and they'll wait for a little longer, keep poking, and then they'll say, okay, fine, we've had enough. And now they've taught that child to get angry and frustrated and grumpy and
it takes that level or that extreme, right?
Yeah.
To make a change.
That's right. So now whenever they do that, you reprimand them for being the way that they are, but it was you that taught them to be that way. So you're letting them do things that makes you dislike them. And so you're not doing them any favor by allowing them to get away with stuff.
That's why if you catch it right away, right, and then you cut it off instantly, right, you're not setting a precedence, right? Like, you can take a work example, right, where, one of my sales staff does something, or they act in a certain way to a customer, and if you don't handle that right away, they're like, I got away with it, even though it was disrespectful and it was not representing the business in a good way, right? But nobody said anything, so I'll just continue to do it. It worked for him, right? But from not even a Christian perspective, but as where are your morals at?
Yeah.
Right. Happened this last week, and I wasn't going to take it, right? And I was like, we don't talk to our customers that way. That's very, that's just not. And I was okay, sorry.
And now it probably will never happen again.
Better not. At this point, my expectations are, better.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you're a grown man, for crying out loud, right? Why would you even say, right? Why would you disrespect your customer that way?
Yeah. One of the things that Jordan Peterson makes mention of in that context is that if you don't like what your child is doing, then there's also a very good chance that other adults won't like what they're doing. So think of a child in a grocery store throwing a fit, yelling and screaming at his mom, whining for something that they want. Everybody in the grocery store is embarrassed for that child. And so as the mom, as the dad, if you're letting your child be the one in the grocery store that everybody disdains and doesn't like, you're not doing your child anything good. You might be thinking, what, I'm just going to let him get away. We'll just get out of the store and I'll go cuddle him. I'll give him a chocolate or buy him something. You just made him the center of attention for a room full of people that don't like him. And he got away with him. That do not like him. And so we made a deal very early on that at the very first sign of any kind of tantrum, fits, I've seen kids throw themselves on the floor, bang their legs and feet, and we just immediately dealt with that. You were not getting away with that, not even once. Yep. And so I've never had my children at 2 and 3, laying down on the floor, throwing fits and slamming doors and stuff.
And they know when you're in a public setting that you can't react the same way you would at home, right? So they're aware of their circumstances, and they're, Dad can't do this or whatever, right?
So they might test you a time or two.
Absolutely, right? But if you cut that off instantly, you just, okay, well now, I tried that, I didn't get away with it, I won't do it again.
It's not going to happen again.
Right? When their kids get away with temper tantrums.
Oh, yeah.
Temper tantrums.
Yeah, it makes you dislike the child. It makes other people dislike the children. I know of a couple boys, 10 to 13 years old or so, that none of their peers really want to hang out with them. And most adults kind of feel awkward around them. Sometimes kids that don't get socialized properly at a young age, where they haven't wrestled with their dad, they haven't been told no, they just do weird things. Like they'll throw themselves at you, or they'll come and talk to you and badger you with things that are just like I don't know, what else do I do with this kid? Like I want to be nice to him, but he's being annoying. Like what else do I do? That I think stems very much from the dad down in the home.
Yeah, if they don't get the attention, and the kid doesn't understand how to react once somebody gives them attention, right? Like I know of a young boy. He's learning. I think he's 11 now, but he does not have a father figure in his life, right? So he does whatever it takes to get attention, and that's rebel against mom, right? And I see it, and we're trying to speak into this young man's life and spend some time with him and be intentional, right? And but he does whatever it takes, like even at church events or at events that the kids attend with this young guy. An 11-year-old should never be running on the pews in a church. I get it from a 3-year-old, but from an 11-year-old, and that's where not having the father, and mom can say, don't run on the benches, right? But when you have that relationship,
has to be really tough to really get crack down on it.
And I could see that it would be exhausting, right? Being a single mother, right?
That's right.
Right. I know this book, Raising a Modern Day Knight, has they're saying that 40% of boys or men don't have father figures in their life, right? And that's an American standard.
That's not
right.
probably an accurate description of our culture, the Mennonite culture, right? No. But globally or across the world, 40%.
40%. That's what they were saying, right? So they don't. Those boys, they never hear, "Son, I love you. Son, I'm proud of you. Son, good job," or way to go, or encourage them, or have any type
or even get the feelings of those words.
Yeah. Just the look, the look of a satisfied father, right? And thinking back to my childhood, right? I didn't, my dad never told me I love you. It wasn't a love language that was spoken, right? And I would imagine you probably had a very similar upbringing.
Yeah, so on that front, I think there's been a lot of dads who have been kind of disconnected from the emotion of being a dad that way, and it's probably not a good thing. I think dads should be telling their sons, "I love you, I'm proud of you." But there has been really good, successful dads who clearly were proud of their sons, and their sons felt like they were pleasing to their fathers, but the fathers just never said it.
But they didn't know how.
Right.
I really don't think they knew how.
Yeah.
Right. Like one of the challenges in this book is take your son out and take ice cream, whatever. Take him out and tell him about all the good things you experienced with your father as when you were a kid. And I'm thinking, okay, well, yeah, there were a lot of good moments.
Sure, there was.
There was a lot of good times. And then as I did this with both of the boys. I took them out and we went for a walk on one of the beach piers or whatever, right? And we were talking. And I was saying good things, and they're like, they caught on right away. They're like, "What are you doing?" Like Allison asked, "Why are you saying this?" I said, "Well, I've realized that often when I talk about Grandpa, I paint a bad picture unintentionally, right?" And even the boys have said, and they're quite innocent. This is when they were much younger, but they were innocent and vocal. They know smoking is bad, right? So they would look at my dad and be like, "Grandpa, smoking kills, right?" And Dad's like, "Yeah." "Then why do you keep doing it? Like, you're just hurting yourself." And they've told him this before, right? And he's like, "Yeah, I know, right?" Kid. But the more I was thinking about what kind of picture do my kids have of their grandfather, and it was not a good one. It wasn't always a good one because
there's plenty of negative to speak of.
So, like when I was disciplined as a child, it was not out of love; it was out of frustration, anger, and
you're cool.
Yeah, he wouldn't keep us cool, right? But when I started talking about the good things, taking them fishing, and taking me fishing, taking us fishing, right? And then I was thinking, I've never taken the boys on a walk down the pier in Burwell, for example, right? Just intentionally done that. That's something my dad did with us, go fishing at the end of the pier, right? Carry all the fish back and whatnot, right? But and there was lots of good moments. But I think if dads express positive vibes, right, instead of all the negatives, whether it be from siblings or from parents or the kids' aunts and uncles, or grandparents, right? The kids will have a different outlook on them for sure, right?
That's interesting. I know that doing those kinds of things, going out and reflecting on what you did with your dad. I would have to sit down and actually consider what things I all did with my dad. But I have plenty of positive memories growing up for sure. But one of the ways too that you don't have to necessarily go out fishing or hunting or walking somewhere to have those valuable things. It can often be just stacking firewood with the boys and then go get them some ice cream. You're stacking or cutting wood or taking the groceries inside. Everybody is carrying how much they can carry. Just little things where they're feeling like they're actually a vital part, and then they're doing it together with you. A lot of dads would just say, "Boys, go out and stack the firewood," and that's sometimes necessary. I just don't have time, and they're going to do it. Not my boys will do that. But if they don't think that I would do it with them, it changes the environment, the attitude about the whole thing, right?
Yeah, it's often our approach, right? What's our goal here? Just to get it done, or are we investing into their lives?
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
Right, because even in this book it says kids or boys they need to see, hear, receive, and experience things, right? And if you're not there, being active in their lives, they're going to miss out on that whole boat, right? Because no matter what, they're watching you, right? And Henry Wall actually had a message at church about surrounding yourself with people that are being a greater influence on you, right? Make sure you're surrounding yourself with people that are being a positive influence on you, right? So when I consider my boys, for example, in my own home, am I being a positive influence? Are kids? Is my family getting energy from me? right? Or am I depressing and is it like gloom and gloom? No, Dad's home, right? We better be on our best behavior, right? Or Dad's home, we're going to do something fun,
cool.
right? Exactly. Yeah. Totally, you can just change everything.
Yeah. I know there's a kind of a cliche statement that goes around where, and it's partially true, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. And there's some value to that. It happens. It's true. But one of the things I've been trying to really emphasize and focus in my teaching is that as the father of the household, as the spiritual leader of the home, as the head of the household, you might think, well, I get to tell everybody what to do. No, you get to set the tone for how everything else operates. If anything in your household is running less than smoothly or less than joyfully, it might not be your fault directly. Maybe your wife has some issues, or maybe your children are being disobedient, but ultimately it comes back to you. So now the father has to come in like the CEO, like the head of the corporation, and say, what can I do to fix this bug? There's some issue here, and it happens again and again and again. So if a dad comes home and his wife is kind of grumpy and moody and the kids are disobedient and unhappy, he could just kind of tune out, turn the TV on, grab a drink and say, forget this, I'm out of here. But it's his own responsibility. You have the responsibility to come home and say, this has got to change. I'm going to turn this thing around. It might require some serious repentance on the part of the dad. Coming before God and confessing the sin that you've been part of, talking to your children about it, saying, look, I haven't been connected. I've been just kind of tuning out. I haven't been present with your mom, and all that kind of stuff, right? Where it's a very serious issue.
But that's where you have the opportunity to do that, right? You just have to grab the bull by the horns and do it, right? Because if you're being passive, right?
It's intentional. Exactly,
right? Things aren't going to get done, right? When I leave every day, right? I'm gone often before the kids wake up. And then when I come home, I have the opportunity to be, often a mediator or change the tone, right? Because I wasn't home all day. I don't know what was involved, right? I know years ago in our marriage preparation classes with Henry and Tina Weeb, they said that when Henry, I believe he worked at Cami, when he came home the first 10 or whatever amount of minutes, 7, whatever amount of minutes, it was mom and dad time. Kids, leave him alone, right? Mom's going to catch me up on today and let us know how, and then we can move on, right? Mother, my wife is first, right? I haven't adapted that, right? I almost think the opposite way, where my kids are excited and they can't contain it often, and they want to tell me about their day's experiences and what they've learned and so on, right? They just joined a new homeschool group, and I heard all about it when I came home from work Friday, right? Yep. And where I'm not putting my wife on the back burner, but she's a little more patient than the 4-year-old, right?
That's one thing, and I'm not going to criticize what you do, but that was one thing that I got encouraged to do very early on is when you do come home from work, you might have to wade through the sea of kids and move them away, but to show them this lady right here, she's actually number one. Mm-hmm. And I made a video about that a while back, right, where I have a shirt that says, my favorite people call me dad. And in fact, my favorite person, my primary one, is my wife. Mm-hmm. And my kids know that. Mm-hmm. I have a guy that I know, I'll put it that way, who walked out on his family. And his intent was, or walked out on his wife, is what he says. He was hoping that he could continue his relationship with his kids in the same way. And I'm like, the very core of your relationship with your kids, like the foundation of your relationship with your kids, is your relationship with your wife. Mm-hmm. It's like Jesus Christ being the chief cornerstone, the apostles making up the bottom of the foundation. The church is built on that. Yep. Yep. So if you have a relationship with your kids, it's only because you have the foundation of their relationship with their mom first. Obviously, God can work miracles with those that don't have a spouse or whatever, right? It happens. Mm-hmm. But the way that it's designed to be is that the kids know that you're absolutely 100% committed to their mom above anything else, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. I get it.
It wasn't meant to be a challenge to your approach.
No, I get it. The way I look at it, as long as everybody gets attention, right? And often, if the kids don't get their excitement out right away, right, then it doesn't happen, right?
Now that most of our kids are a bit older, so I worked from home for like 10 years, so I didn't get to experience this quite as much. But now, when I come home, Lisa, usually if she's somewhere close, she'll quickly run in before anybody else can hug me, and then her and I first. Yep. And I'll even kind of push one of the kids away just to make it kind of a fun game, right? Yep. We're like, no, mommy first, and then I'll do the greeting and the hugging and all that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, we've definitely been in those moments. right? Depends how the day unfolded throughout the day, right?
Right. One of the things I want to point out, since you don't quite have teenagers yet, is that it doesn't seem like it, but I had people tell me this, that what your child is at 2, they will be at 12. What they are at 14, or 4, they'll be at 14, and so on. And I would say very much that your relationship to your child at 3, 4, 5, and 6 will be very similar to your relationship at 13, 14, 15, 16. Even though it's at a much more mature level, you're not wrestling on the floor with them all the time, you're not tickling them and all that kind of stuff. But the camaraderie, the strings that kind of bound you together, they're still there when they're older. And so if you're annoyed at your 2-year-old and your 3-year-old and 4-year-old and you're irritated with them and they're annoying to you, they will be the same way at 13 and 14. But then they have enough strength and courage to kind of resist and fight back. Whereas they don't have to. If you get along with them really well at 2 and 3 and 4 and you expect obedience and you get it, then at 13, 14, 15, 16,
the relationship is already
still
built,
there. Yeah.
Right? You've built a relationship from young on where you can trust each other, right?
Yeah.
I know a young father who, I've never heard him say this to his kid, but he has told me that he said it to his kid, "Go away, you're annoying."
Oh, man.
Or "Go away, I don't, just leave me alone." And I'm thinking, do you know what you're doing?
Yeah.
And I have no problem telling this guy, like, you're missing the whole boat on the opportunity you have to be a father and to direct and guide your son.
Yeah.
Right? Like this boy's a year and a half. When you have perfect moments just to sit and read him a book, right? Just to do something, get down on the floor, get down to their level, right? And often that's a challenge all on its own, right? Getting down to their level, things that excite them, right?
There's a time and a place, I would think, for maybe a 6-year-old who hasn't learned patience, and they're just interrupting. Say, hang on, you just wait a minute. I will get to you. Yeah. But when I'm talking, just give me a moment, right? And they can respect
teach
that,
them patience, for sure.
But at the same time, to just say go away and not give them a proper explanation and stuff, that's a totally different ballgame for sure. You had another quote there?
Well, no, in this book, there's a section on what does it mean to become a man. At what point in time does a young man, like on this DVD series, it's they ask a lot of dads, at what point in time did you become a man? Or I don't know if you want to answer that without knowing what answer this has. Yeah. We haven't talked about this.
I have thought about this quite a bit in the last little while. I think it was Mark Driscoll who said something along the lines of, a boy is someone who needs someone to take care of him. A young man is someone who can kind of take care of himself. And a man is someone who takes care of himself and others. And so I often look back and I'm like, when I was a teenager, 16, 17, 18, in some ways I was a boy, or a man. I could shave and I could lift heavy things and I could keep a job. But I didn't really feel like I was actually fully a man until I held that little baby in my arms for the first time. Where I was like, I'm a man. I'm taking care of this little child.
And you were 20?
20, yeah. 21.
Yeah, right. So for the first 20 years, right, somebody has the opportunity to teach and train and influence you to become who God has designed you to be, right?
Right.
To become a man, right? And if these young boys don't have that influence in their life, they'll turn to the carnal side, right? When I have my first beer, right? When I smoke my first joint, or when I go to my first strip club, or right? And that's the definition, or when they lose their virginity, whatever, right? And that's the carnal mindset of becoming a man, right? I just became a man, whatever, right? But when you have the opportunity, right? One quote in this book that I have.
Praise God that I felt like a man when I had it. I didn't even try to do that. That's just happened to me, right?
Like I know, and you were never a troubled teenager.
Not really,
right? But one quote out of this book that has altered my life or guided me, huge, is to live pure, speak truth, right wrong, and follow the King.
Say it again.
Live pure.
Yep.
Speak truth, right wrongs, and follow the King.
Okay.
So when you incorporate all 4 of those together, right, and you're able to adjust your life and your personality and who you are as a person, right? You live in a pure manner, whether it be physical, your mind, who you are, right? That second glance, right, is what gets you into trouble, right? And then to speak truth, right? You don't have to exaggerate, right? And then you have the opportunity to witness, right, to share the gospel. And whether it be to your children or to your family or when people look at you, right? Your personality,
Yeah.
your character, your morals. People they louder, often actions speak words than words, right?
That's right.
Right, and then you have opportunity to right wrongs, right? Things that you have messed up on, or you can guide your children in the right direction, right? And then obviously follow the Lord, right?
Right.
And when it's kind of backwards in my opinion, right? You follow the Lord, the rest will follow.
Right.
Right.
But there is, like, I taught the book of Titus out in Alberta, and he says at the beginning of that book, he says Paul sent Titus to the church at Crete to set in order the things that were wanting, and then he goes into this whole long thing where he tells them you need to have elders in the church, and the elders need to be like this. Mm-hmm. They need to walk in a certain way. They need to have these qualifications. Then he says aged men need to be this way, aged women need to be that way. And young men need to be this way. Servants need to be that way. Bosses need to be this way. Their masters. And on and on and on it goes. It says that you may adorn the doctrine of Christ. And so to me, there's nothing more appealing to the lost and to the sinners of this world than a well-ordered family and a husband and wife who actually love each other mm-hmm. and care for each other. Mm-hmm. Obedient, happy children that are actually content to be at home and love their parents and so on. It's attractive to the world around us because there's not much of that in the world, right?
No. People will often, there's a saying that somebody's always watching you. Just like you're always learning from somebody. You always have a role model in your life, right? You're always watching somebody, and somebody's always watching you, mm-hmm. right? It's by my brother Abe. He mentioned the other day that he could choose, or he can choose who he wants to be more like, right? And he was just naming a few different people, right? And he says, "Don't get on your high horse here, but I like your life. I like the way you live. I love the way you treat your kids, the way you treat your wife." And he's bragging me up, and he's a single 22-year-old, right? But it felt,
of course it feels good.
Felt good, right? To hear compliments, right? To see that just our there's fruit that we're sowing, right? Mm-hmm. It's being planted, right? So it's right. It's encouraging to.
It's an investment, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things I heard a little bit ago that I think is very relevant is that let's say you have a 20-year-old or an 18-year-old who's starting to question certain things in life, maybe has some influences in their life that are not beneficial or good, and you feel like you need to put your foot down and say, no, this is not okay. Mm-hmm. You can do that with a 3-year-old easily. Just take it away from them or say no, and they'll listen. But once they turn 12 and 13, they start seeing that my friends are doing it, and I don't care what dad says anymore. They could easily start thinking, I just don't care. And so this guy was saying, think about your children almost in terms of a bank account or an investment financially. If you don't put in large sums of savings into that account, then when it comes time to withdraw something from it, there's not going to be any funds there. So a dad who's been not present, hasn't been with the kids when they were 2 and 3 and 4, didn't develop any kind of relationship with them, didn't teach them obedience. Now they have a 17, 18-year-old girl that wants to go out with a boy that is terrible for them, and you do know better. You can say, this boy is not good for you. The daughter's going to be like, I don't care what you think. It doesn't matter to me. I'm in love with this boy. He loves me, and it doesn't matter. So you could say, you're not seeing him again. What's that going to do? You're just going to push that daughter away. You're just going to. So the only way as a father now of a couple girls that are of age, right? The only way I have the opportunity to influence them and actually speak into their life and say, I'm not going to choose for you, but this guy here, there might be some issues you want to watch for, or this practice that you might be getting into, it's probably not the smartest. The book that you're reading or the movie that you're watching maybe isn't the healthiest. I have the capital or the investment to go in and say, that's probably not the best, and then they'll be like, okay.
They'll respect it. They'll listen because there's a relationship that's taken years.
That's right.
Years to build, right?
And investing. I remember Herman Buchert once saying years ago, he's got 7, 8 kids now, right? And he said that his children are his investment. Yep. And I'm like, well, that makes total sense, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you're not the most successful financially, but you've got capital invested in your kids, right?
Yeah. He we went out for breakfast a while ago, and we were talking about families and kids and so on, right? And just to have larger families and the enjoyment and so on, right? So it was a change of stubbornness or change of heart on my part, not towards big families, but towards a potential growing family. Right? So an interesting change in mindset, right? And that's why I enjoy people and even sit downs, right? And where you get to learn from other people, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
One more thing I wouldn't mind touching on, because I know you are very active and intentional in this way too. So if, like I said before, if our relationship to our wives is the foundation of our relationship to our kids and to our marriage or to our family and all that, what do you do intentionally with your wife? You guys been married 10 years, 11 years now?
10 and a half.
10 and a half years.
Yeah.
And I remember when you first came around to our family and started seeing Linda, you seemed mature enough for a 19, 21-year-old, whatever you were at the time. But, I had my reservations and my issues where I thought, I don't know, a little immature maybe. But you've been very intentional about pursuing your wife, even when you guys disagree or butt heads on little things. So maybe talk about that a little bit.
When people talk about feelings, and when I fell in love with this person, you can fall all you want, but if you base your life on feelings, you're not going to be together. Because it's a thrill, it's a new high, it's a new excitement, right?
You could get more somewhere else.
Exactly, right? And it's feelings, right? To this day, my wife still gives me butterflies, right? Like if she says something, whatever, like, yeah, right? Anyway, we just, and it's exciting, it's thrilling. But if you invest into their lives and if you just intentionally spend time together versus letting life go by, right? If you just let it, often I wing it.
Yeah.
And I'm not recommending people to wing it, but I get away with it sometimes. It works.
Because you're pretty quick on your feet that way. You'll just quickly do something and it makes her feel special. Anyway.
Yeah.
So what would you do intentionally? I know some people are really big advocates to dating at least once a week or something like that. Do you have any practices like that?
We used to. One thing that was very, very important to us, and I know I've mentioned this to lots of people, is we used to do a lot of reality checks, just to sit down, slow down, and be like, okay, this is right. No grudges are being left here. What we speak is truth, and if something's driving me absolutely crazy, it's something that you're doing right, and then we get it all on the table, and then we learn from each other and move on.
And that works? You just move on?
We just move on. I really don't think we've ever had a reality check where it's like, whoa.
But there's been like hurtful or offensive things brought up at those reality checks?
No, because we practice them because I think it's good for us, right? But I don't think that we've ever had a serious enough issue, right? Like to this day, my wife and I really think we've had one disagreement, and I told her this right before we were married, or at the beginning of our relationship anyway. I told her, I said, if I ever get so upset that I'm going to say something I'm going to regret, I'm going to walk out. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to cool down. I'm going to understand what's happening, and I'm going to come back and we'll talk about it. I've had to do that once in 10 and a half years. And we've never had to do that again.
But you've been irritated with her.
Yeah.
Like maybe
and
our wives like shopping.
Yep.
They like go out together and buy things sometimes that we feel are unnecessary. Yep. But you keep it going anyway. Yeah. Like some guys would get bitter at their wives and angry, and I've done it myself where it gets frustrating or something like that, and you allow it to get to you. Yep.
Yeah, and if I don't know the way we do, if I just express our financial situation or our spending habits, or I don't want to fall into the rest of the world where money, sex, and drugs, right, affect our life, right? But even from a Christian perspective, finances has a huge decision on, or a huge part of our lives, obviously, right? On what we're capable of doing, right? And if it just squandered away, we can't enjoy, right? It's just gone, right? And that's often where we do disagree or butt heads, right? Yeah. As far as spending habits and so on, right?
Obviously, if you literally cannot afford something and you're slowly going broke, it's a different scenario too. But there came a time in my life too where I had to realize that, okay, I didn't appreciate what she spent here maybe, or I didn't agree with what she spent there. A lot of times it was just me not recognizing we're going to need it anyway, why not buy it? Yeah. Other times it's like, okay, now it's already there. Is there any point in having a big to-do over this and maybe getting angry at each other or being frustrated at each other for a couple days? It's a thing.
You needed it anyway.
It's a thing. Yeah. Why not just get over it and realize that money is less important than this relationship?
Yeah. Yeah, a couple of years ago when I had my boat, every day off that I had, I'd be on the water. Opportunity that I had. And Linda just mentioned once, she says, so you're gone a lot. You're working or you're fishing.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, so?
It's fishing.
All right. I'm taking the boys out. I'm investing in their lives, or I'm investing in friends' lives, or we're going out, or Sunday morning. Right. We're Sunday afternoon. We're fishing, and you can hang out with their wives. It's all fine.
Win-win.
And she says, but you're spending a lot of time away from us. Right. And then I started thinking, and it was a good reality check. Right. Like, okay, I sold a boat. Right. I wasn't attached to it. I enjoyed fishing.
Yeah.
I haven't sold my fishing gear because I'm going to buy another boat.
Eventually, you get
right.
another one. Yeah. But sometimes you do have to lay something aside to learn what it means, what the value of it actually is, and then place it in the right spot and then come back to it, right? I did that with baseball. Part of it was a pride thing. Part of it was just spending time on things that didn't matter. And I had to eventually just, okay, stop. I'm not going to play baseball at all. Now I can go back to it and enjoy it in its proper order, right?
As long as it doesn't run your life, right?
Yeah.
I know last couple of years ago, we had the youth over at our place. It might have been last summer. And there was one young individual, and I was doing the devotional on relationships, and I just asked this young man. I said, "How's your relationship with your dad?" He goes, "I don't know. I don't have one." And I was like, "What do you mean you don't have one?" And I know his dad and whatever, right? And I was like, "What do you mean you don't have one?" And he goes, "He's always busy. He's always doing this and this and this and this and this, and he's never home." And he just and I was like, "Oh, that hurts." Good. Like I'm I feel for this guy, right? But so to be able to invest the time, right, to be there, it's and for us not to be selfish, right, to not have an issue with giving up your, if I even money, right, like if I go out and if I buy a $300 item, and then it's like I didn't really need that, but because I wanted it, I would spend money in a long time, I just did it, right. Then I go shopping and spend $300 on whatever. I'm like, you just did that last month. What are you thinking, right? But it's just different perspective of our necessities, right? Because I'm often a very selfish person, and I catch myself being selfish all the time. This is what I want, and like I joke around at work all the time, right? If I'm disagreeing with the vehicle that I bought and it's in arbitration, there's an issue with it, I get what I want, and I'm very persuasive when it comes to getting what I want and how to go about it, right?
But it's purely from a selfish perspective for the business.
For the business,
right?
Yeah. But that's followed me home, right? So often I get what I want. If we go somewhere, if we hang out with certain people, if we go drive somewhere, whatever, it's typically what I want, right? And often I disregard what my wife wants, right? Earlier I touched on what Herman had said when we were going out for breakfast about larger families and whatnot. So Lynn and I, we were talking about it, and she was saying that kids are such a blessing, and they are, right? And for her she's such a great mom, right? And she's talked about growing her family and so on. And I told her, I said, look, from my selfish standpoint, okay, I can drive a truck from work, a 6-passenger truck. Okay, if we go camping, if we go pick up a piano for the boys, whatever, I can just drive a truck. We don't need to. Everybody hops in, and away we go.
And one more might throw that off.
I said, what would we do then? Yeah. And she doesn't. She'll never be rude or disrespectful and say you're selfish or you're out of line or whatever, right? But I get the vibe of the conversation, right? And then I started thinking, okay, well, who am I to hold something my wife has a desire for, right? Something that my wife is really good at, and she's a gifted mother. She's fantastic, right?
And it's such a natural desire for women to want to do that, right? To bear children and to nurse them, and
Yeah, and then for me to just hold her back from something that she has a heart for, right? Like our kids are fantastic, right? The youngest one, we're still learning, right?
Yeah.
But the fact that a fifth one might be coming in September is an interesting perspective all on its own, right?
Oh boy!
Right? I won't say that I lied to your wife inside, but I couldn't help it. Right?
Public announcement on the.
So now you have to wait. Now you have to wait to post this.
Yeah.
Until people. Right?
Nice.
Or you can edit it later on. Yeah. Right? But it was an interesting perspective, right?
Yeah.
But it's amazing. You've been married for 10 years, right? Having we have 9-year-old. He's going to be 10 in April, right? And then the excitement of getting to do it all over again, right? But this time better.
Yeah.
Right. With more experience and wisdom and knowledge, right?
Right.
On how to handle it.
There's kind of two angles on that, though. A lot of the youngest kids, and many people probably will be able to identify with this. Parents who are not intentional, a lot of times the youngest one turns out a little bit more rotten than some of the others. They get more spoiled, they get more stuff. Their parents are wealthier by the time they have the youngest ones, and they just don't have to do as much. Everybody else takes care of them. But to be intentional and focus on them and to make sure you implement a lot of the same principles on them is going to be very good. And then they get to grow up with constant interaction with their peers and stuff like that, or older children and stuff. And your older children get the opportunity to train, to teach younger ones. And as long as it's coming into a home where there's peace and joy about it.
Yeah, there's so much love, and like you said, it'll teach the older ones, right, how to care and how to be patient, understanding, and so on, right? So it's well, you've been there, you've done that.
Well, I mean, even now we've got a 19-year-old, and they're still often saying that we should have some more. Right? We're only 40. Not even Lisa's not even 40. So it'd be easy still.
Lots of opportunities. Lots of opportunities, right? So no, it's an exciting part of growing, right, from many different aspects. But one quick question before we go. When I listened to your podcast with Jonathan Steele and with Joshua Steele, sorry, and his unsureness of salvation at the age of 18, right? I've been talking to Austin about this, and he's 9 now. So at what age? I know the answer is probably going to be different maturity levels. Each boy's different, and so on, right? But I've had the opportunity to explain the gospel to him, and he gets it, and he understands it, right? And if I asked him if he wanted to give his heart to the Lord and to surrender and to, right? And he'd say, of course. But I know for sure he doesn't understand it all. Yeah. But nobody does at the beginning, right? So is it selfish? Is it from a selfish mindset, or from, I want him to really understand what he's surrendering? Because when he asked me a while ago after communion, he goes, "Daddy, what am I being saved from?" Right? And I was like, "That's
very good question.
That's deep from a 9-year-old, right?" And I said, "Well, all these." He's told a guy listens to testimonies, and he listens to a lot of them as well, right? And he goes, "All these other guys, they go do drugs and they move out and they go do all these bad stuff, and then they come to God."
It's no wonder they need to be saved.
He goes, "So what am I being said? You're preventative. You're being saved from doing all that stuff, right?" And you get to choose to live for Christ so much earlier in life, right? So you don't have to go down the same path, right? Yeah. But I don't want him just to say what I want him to say for the sake of making me happy, right? Yeah.
So from my perspective, and I don't think I have this all figured out, I get this question quite a bit, is that for one, a lot of times young boys and young girls will go through stages and phases where they really want to talk about the idea of religion, and all that gets very exciting to them, and it often just wears off. So to me, when the genuine thing really happens and someone really gets born again, it isn't just a little phase. It's their life. They give themselves to it. So usually at 8, 9, and 10, they don't really fully comprehend that. Maybe even 10 and 12 and 13 often. Maybe it's sometimes even more connected to the idea of becoming a man. When I got saved is when I became a man. Shortly after that, I realized my need for salvation. But it doesn't mean you should turn them away from it. The gospel should just be forefront and center in their understanding. This is who God is. That's how we connect to him, only through Jesus. And so part of it is that very thing, like allowing him to hear other testimonies, seeing how they came to grips with eternity and God and Jesus and all that. And then I would like to kind of make the connection, say, okay, so this guy committed adultery. He went out on his wife. He cheated. Or this guy, he actually came out of jail. Hear his testimony. He was in prison for committing murder and so on and so forth. And then doing what Jesus did, saying to look with lust is actually the same thing. On scale, it looks smaller, and it's not as detrimental to society or to other people.
But to acknowledge sin is sin.
To see that the little thing that you did, that bitterness that you showed towards your brother, that anger that you had, the fact that you disobeyed mommy the other day, or the way that you spoke to her, that's like a little seedling of the big sin. All you have to do to become this big sinner, the murderer and the rapist and all that, is just to let that little seed grow, right? So you have the same sin in your heart today as that guy did. So if he needed to be saved for having actually acted on all the things, You need to be saved because you have the capacity to do the same things, right? And so when you discipline them, when you train them, as you're seeing things in their life that really do fall short of the glory of God, to point it out as sin, it might just seem like a small disobedience to you and to me or to society around us. But recognize that this is the very thing that produced murderers. This is the very thing that produced adulterers and so on and so forth. Right? And I don't know how successful I've been at that, but I think our religious kids, our good kids, need to recognize that they're just as capable of the darkest sins out there as Hitler and all the others, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where, like, I'm just thinking at that age, right? If we guide them, right, and help them to understand, like you were just saying, right, like that seed can grow, right? But they don't, not to go down that path, right, to prevent that damage from happening, right?
Yeah. On the same note, at the same time, I like for them at the age of 8 or 10 or 12 or whatever to know that when they do find themselves to be sinners and they recognize their guilt before God, that they also at the same time will know, yeah, but Jesus paid it. So that it would be like this instantaneous thing where they're like, oh man, I'm guilty before God. Oh, but God made a way, right? That would take place. Maybe they won't recognize when or where it happened, like Joshua Steele. I don't know if he knows when he got saved. Kind of that little moment when he was very young, but then you don't know, right?
Yeah, well, lots of growth, right? And that's where sanctification comes in, right? Continuous growth, right? But for them to realize it themselves that they're in need of a savior, right? Yep. Just like if I screw up, being told is one thing, but if I learn myself, it's different, right? It's that some memory just forms into my brain, right? That I learned this because I did this, right? And when I think when they realize that he understands he needs a savior, right? But what he's being saved from, right?
So like intellectually, as a young boy, he might recognize, okay, well, I guess that's why I need a savior, But it might happen that a lot of our kids that are raised good, quote unquote good, they might get to their teen years or even into their 20s and then really let somebody down or lose somebody that's very close to them. And then at that point, maybe all this stuff will register and they'll be like, I believed this, but I don't know if I ever really believed it until now. Now it's real, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I've often talked about this. When you have a chair, if I was standing here, I could look at this chair and examine it and decide, I think this chair will hold me. I'm pretty sure. Like, there's wood legs, it's nice, solid. I'm sure it'll hold me, but I could be standing here saying it will hold me. And I believe that chair will hold me. But you're not fully trusting in the chair until you sit down and you rest in it. And so our children, hopefully, through years of instruction, and that's what the instruction of the Old Testament is for the law. Moses was told, tell the families, teach them when you rise up in the morning, when you walk by the way, when you lie down at night, be instructing them, remind them, this is how God freed us from Egypt. This is how I got saved. This is where I came from. And then slowly it will, almost like you're indoctrinating them, right? And then one day it'll really become reality.
Yep. But the entire time you're planting seeds and you're watering and you're.
And we believe that this book is living and it's alive. And as we implant it into our children, it will grow. It'll become something.
Yeah. But even to express to the kids that it's a decision. You're choosing to believe that is truth, right? Instead of
put your faith in it, trust it.
Yep. Yeah.
Amen.
No,
seems
absolutely.
like a good place to close it. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.